All right, welcome back to the channel. I'm here with my good friend Luke Feeney, and we're going to be reacting to Red Gadget's tier list based on 100,000 Edison rated matches. Now, I saw this video, someone sent it to me in our Discord server, the IMNerdpodcast Discord server. And I thought that the concept of this is very interesting. It's something I've never seen ever for Yu-Gi-Oh, but someone extracting 100,000 replays, I guess, and then isolating the decks that are played in those replays on rated specifically, and then saying what is the win rate of these decks, and then putting them in a tier list based on their win rate. It's just kind of unheard of. And what's cool about it is that 100,000 is a really large sample size. We know at this point in Edison format that basically any deck can win a tournament, basically any deck can top a tournament, but tournaments are very small sample sizes when you think about it. Like a deck only has to play 8 rounds sometimes 11 rounds. Even the YCS and Raleigh, it was 187 players and the winner played 11 rounds total, and that's great. But for the purposes of determining like what is a really good deck based on win rate, 11 rounds is not a big sample size at all, right? So 100,000, that number got me immediately excited because I'm a numbers guy also in real life. Like for my job, I also do a bit of data analytic type of work. I'm an accountant, but it obviously crosses over with us also analyzing data and all types of statistics work and stuff like that too. So yeah, Red Gadget is actually a data analytics student, or I think that that's what he does for his career. He says it in the beginning of the video, but yeah, he explains here, what did I do over the last few months? I collected 100,000 Edison rated matches, played on Dueling Book, and extracted the win rates associated with each meta deck. So there are obviously some things that are a bit of a disclaimer about this. One, there are decks that he kind of forgot about in terms of putting them on the tier list. I think Diva Hero is one of them. So that's like a missing deck. And then the other thing is that this is based on just Dueling Book results, which is not necessarily indicative of how a deck actually performs in the meta per se. Is just, you have to just take it for what it is, right? Like Dueling Book is not what real Yu-Gi-Oh tournaments are like all the time. Like people on rated, you know, they play how they feel. There's no real stakes in it. And I do think that people play a bit differently in tournaments than they would on, again, a Dueling Book rated ladder or whatever. But at the end of the day, this is still a great analytical tool to use to just like, it's just more information in the format. It's just another way to kind of say, okay, what is this deck actually doing in Edison format? So I thought it'd be interesting to do a reaction to it, and that's why we're here. So with that being said, why don't we just jump over to the actual tier list? Because the rest of this, I do recommend that you check out Red Gadget's channel. It's relatively new, and you can learn a lot about how he did this project. I won't go over that stuff with you guys here. You can watch his video if you want to see like how he came up with the actual statistical analysis part of it and how he put together everything. But for the purposes of our video, we're just going to be going right to the tier list and seeing what decks are ranked where based on their win rate on 100,000 Dueling Book rated matches.
Okay, so let's begin with the tier list. On the bottom here, we have all the decks that I selected for the analysis. These were the top meta contenders, the decks that people are interested in seeing, of course. And on the left here, we have the win rates in percentages. So across all the 10,000 matches, what was the score of this deck given all the other decks it played, right? So across all matchups, what percentage of the games did this deck won. So I also want to preface this by saying that I will just explain a little bit of what I personally feel about the deck, but this does not mean that this is true. I'm just showing you what the statistics have shown, and I don't really want to do much of interpretation, because some of these decks maybe are very complicated to play, maybe they're underrepresented, so I don't really know what's going on. I can only give you my interpretation. But let's start with the first deck, being X-Sabers. So this deck belongs here. So it has slightly higher chance than random at winning. It can be very explosive, and I mean, for me, this personally makes sense. I mean, this deck has not been topping a lot lately, and it can snag some steals, but nothing major. And of course, the statistics show this. Secondly, I think this deck is very interesting, and in fact, this deck is what I played when I started playing Yu-Gi-Oh. I was a bit of a toxic player, so yeah, I played Chainburn a lot. And this deck, I'm very happy to see that it's actually in this.
So, okay, so immediately we have X-Sabers and we have Chainburn, and I think that both of those decks, for the most part, are not very good in Edison format. This is no surprise to anyone really. Like X-Sabers being towards the bottom, they're just missing too many cards in Edison format. I've encountered them on the ladder a couple times. I don't think I've ever lost to this deck. I have come close, I won't lie about that. Like, I'm not going to cap. There have been game states where I'm in game 3 and I'm like, bro, if he has cat here or fall troll here, I actually just lose. But for some reason, it just never ends up happening like that. The deck is just missing too much. And I don't think that anyone really expects X-Sabers to be like some crazy Edison deck, to be honest. Chainburn has been getting a little bit more popular lately. Like, I know that there was some that almost topped the last RBET, or maybe one of the last like deck devastators or Pico to Beak or whatever, one of the online tournaments, but I have yet to see one of them actually make it all the way there. So I don't have a high opinion on either of these decks. I think that where they're tiered in terms of just being like in the bottom half of the tier list is accurate.
Yeah, real quick, I just want to talk about like the way he set up this tier list in general. I mean, the fact that the win rate spreads are like so small is interesting to me. I
find that interesting too. Yeah,
it's kind of indicative of like a format where a lot of decks are competitive, I would say, which is like historically what people like about Edison. But as you say, there's always, you know, decks that are going to be better than others, and yeah, I'm not surprised to see X-Sabers and Chainburn kind of being... Well, Chaimburn's actually... I mean, I guess Chaimburn's like in the middle of this tier list, kind of, so it's not like that bad, but I feel like a lot of that's just because people don't currently respect it, and there's always like... I feel like that's a deck where there's always ways to beat it if you want to beat it. You just like need to play kind of niche cards, which you wouldn't otherwise play. But,
yeah, and you have to play a certain way as well. You know, like the one thing about playing against Chainburn is that you don't want to just immediately use your Heavy Storm or your MST and stuff like that. You want to make it where you basically OTK them. So you kind of want to wait until you have like a crazy setup and then you explode in one turn and make it where they can't recover from that. And that's typically the way you play against it. But if you try to nickel and dime them 1-for-1 like that, you'll lose.
Yeah.
And so the good players know that. People might not. I also think that this is another thing. If I go on Dueling Book ladder and I get into a match and it's Chainburn, there's a high chance I'm clicking the quit button. There's a really high chance that I just like immediately quit.
Yeah, and you just like can't be bothered to play against Chainburn, which is totally fair. I think people value their time, which is an aspect that, again, is different between online and real life, right? Because like in real life, if you're at the YCS, you've paid to be there or whatever, you're sitting down against Chainburn, like it sucks, but you're playing that match out to win. You're not gonna go get up. You're not signing the slip and walking away.
You're 100% right, Luke. If I went to Raleigh and I played Chainburn round 1, guess what? I guess I'm just playing Chainburn round 1. Like I'm not leaving the match because I don't want to play against it. But on Dueling Book, rate it. If I log on and I say I want to get some playtesting in, and the guy starts doing Chainburn stuff, I'm probably clicking the quit button, realistically. So
yeah, that's a good point. Honestly, that's a good point. Yeah.
This category here, so between 52 and 53% win rate, so it does a lot better, surprisingly. Actually, there have been some people playing this deck in the past, which I'm very happy to see as well. But yeah, overall a good deck, and I have nothing more to really add to this. Then we have Christia's Sworn. So Christia's Sworn is like one of these decks that has a lot of boss monsters. It plays all the cards that synergize with lights. It's a very strong deck. It popped, I think, one of the RBTs, if I recall correctly. Maybe it was even first place. And yeah, actually, when I started to play Edison a year ago, this was the deck I picked up. And yeah, I'm a big fan of this deck. I think it can snag some steals. And of course, it belongs in this category, but in front Chainburn. Now, Quickdraw. So these were all the decks that kind of include Quickdraw and all of this hamster Raiko engine and the mill, the spam, the synchros and such.
So, Christia's Sworn being in the middle of the road on the same tier as Chainburn is interesting to me, because in my head, Christia's Sworn is a very good meta pick, especially when the meta consists of like frogs, Dragon Turbo, decks like that, and I think even against dark decks, because it can suck Consecrated Light and then abuse Consecrated Light over and over again, but it does lose to Deck Devastation Virus, which those decks also happen to side deck and sometimes even main deck, and that might be a gatekeeper of Christia's Swarm. The deck is very, very powerful, so it's interesting to see it on the same tier as like Chainburn. Another thing that I think is interesting about this tier list is we don't know the distribution of games played with each deck, and I think that could like skew some of the results and the way we think about it anyway. Like at the end of the day, the win rate is the win rate, no matter how many games they play. Like if Christia's Sworn played, 10 games and the win rate was 50%, then like, okay, it won 5, it lost 5 or whatever. But if Christia's Sworn played 90,000 games, right, and Chainburn played 1,000 of the games, then the Christia's Sworn statistics are way more accurate per se. Like the more volume you have, the better. I'm just wondering how the volume distribution is across these decks is something that I was thinking about, because I don't think Christian Sworn is popular. Like, it's not a popular deck.
No, that's a really good point, because part of the reason we're looking at this video is because 100,000 we're saying was like reasonably significant statistically, but if within the 100,000 the subset of games that Chamberlain's in is like 1,000, right? That's not nearly as significant, so it's kind of hard to say.
Yeah, and
we might even see some outliers that like look really good, like maybe I don't know, maybe Amaryllis is like just very underplayed and it's like winning every game, but like it has a sample size of like 100 games, so it's just like you don't know.
Yeah, because I feel like Chamberlain is definitely a underutilized deck. It's definitely a deck that people do not play often, even on Dueling Book ladder or whatever. I think that Chamberlain is very unpopular. So I imagine that out of the 100,000 games that he used as a sample size, I would say that Chamberlain's probably on the lower end of decks that people actually pick to play. That's just based off of headcanon though. I don't know, but I just assume that looking at all the decks at the bottom and looking at the decks that are already tiered, that one is not played that much. Now, what I will say is that Quickdraw being at the bottom of the tier list, like towards the bottom anyway, the bottom half, that also makes sense to me. This deck fell off a lot because Blackwings is so good in Edison format and people know that. So is Value Turbo. I think that both of those decks are a bad matchup for Quickdraw because of things like Oppression, Deck Devastation Virus, Piercing in Blackwing's case, a lot of Piercing. Those things just like really ruin this deck. And yeah, I mean, it won the actual SJC Edison. Everyone knows that, but it has not really done much since then, which is interesting. So, I'm just not surprised that it's ranked so low.
Yeah, I've never been a fan of this deck ever since I started playing the format. I think it's just one of those things where like people considered like Drill Warrior like really powerful and really good back in the day, and now I think everyone understands how the card works. And even if you summon it, it's not like GG or anything. It's just like pretty middle. It's pretty middling. So like, I'm never afraid when I play against Quickdraw. I'm just like, all right, this is probably like good for me that they're playing this card.
Yeah, you're getting a lot of turns and all that. Like it's just not one of the better decks in the format at this point. So
yeah, this deck belongs here, 51 to 52% win rate. It's a strong deck. It's a historical deck, and I think it makes sense here. And the statistics show that it's somewhere around here. Now, the following deck, which is like this Phantom of Chaos nuke board value infused dark synergy. Yeah, so this deck does not really seem to have very, very good results. It does everything that Value does, but kind of slightly worse. And also, it has these cards such as like level 8s that you might break on and such. So it actually has lower than 50% win rate. Although it's a very cool deck, I have to admit, I don't think it performs very well, and that's why we're not seeing it in major tournaments.
So this is interesting because this deck won the Nationals in Europe, if I'm not mistaken. The guy lost round 1, and then he won 10 straight to win the Ultimate Time Wizard tournament over there. And the deck was like popular after that happened, of course, for a little while, and then it just kind of like fell off like most decks do after they get a top, and then it becomes multiple content creators, including myself, make a video about it. People go on Dueling Book ladder, they try it out, and then they realize, like, okay, this isn't really for me. I am fond of Norlaris in theory, but then when I do play it, I've suffered from just bricking, like he said, and losing to people who I know for a fact like I'm better than, but like the deck just doesn't allow me to really flex my skill a lot of the times because you just draw some hands that are literally unplayable, or your opponent just has a side deck card that absolutely blows you out. Again, Deck Devastation Virus ruins this deck just as bad, because at the end of the day, your main thing is to do a Phantom of Chaos play, and then like they just deck dev you. You can't possibly do it at that point unless your hand is like super nice and you have like Future Fusion and all kinds of other crazy stuff if you're playing the Dragon build. And yeah, so this deck, I'm not really surprised. Also, things like DD Crow, which is a very normal side deck card. Like you can't ever be mad when somebody DD Crows you. But like that card, DD Crow is pretty much in most side decks, and this deck loses to DD Crow. So yeah, I think that is a big deal as well. Also, I would say that this is another deck that's probably not very popular though. Like I bet the sample size for this deck, just this deck by itself, is also very low. I don't think a lot of people play it. And I definitely know that most of the skill players do not touch this deck either. Like it's rare that you'll see somebody who's like really good playing a Norlaris deck. That's just how it is. The good players tend to favor some of the decks that you're going to see later on, which makes sense.
Yeah, I remember one of the early RBTs or whatever. I think you took Norlaris, if I'm not mistaken. And I just remember you complaining about bricking all day. And I feel like if you ever brick game one, especially, it's really hard to win the match because, like you say, you're so weak to sideboard cards like that are very common, like DD Grow, that like it's kind of one of those glass cannon decks where you're expecting to always win game one, and then you just need to like have things go correctly 1 out of 2 times in the post-board games. Like, but if you lose game one, then it's like you have such a mountain to climb. It's really hard.
Yeah, I fully agree with that.
Now, the next deck is Zombies. Zombies is another very strong deck, and in fact it belongs in this category. It can be very explosive, very hard to play. Maybe that's also the reason why it's here, because people usually put it higher up in the tier list. But I think on average, like if you're an average player with this deck, you might not know the best lines, therefore it might be in a lower tier list such as this one, and it actually falls in between these two decks.
So Zombies has won quite the number of tournaments throughout Edison. Nothing compared to Blackwings or Value or anything like that, but it has won tournaments in the past. And I think that it's always like a threat in the meta, but as the meta gets faster and just more refined, I feel like Zombies does have a bit of a problem. Like, I think the zombie matchup against Blackwing and Value is not very good. I know people like to cope and act like it can do good against those decks. I do not agree. I think that the fact that Zombies needs 2 cards to play, it plays right into Blackwing's main game plan. Like, you cannot do anything with Zombies with just 1 card. You basically need like Zombie plus Tuner, or Caius plus Galma Zombie, or like these 2-card plays. A lot of times they're weak to either Oppression or Icarus Attack, especially things like that, and it really just throws the deck off balance a lot of the times. Don't get me wrong, a good zombie player can definitely like do well, and again, they have like Beast Mode has taught many tournaments in the past with zombies, but lately in the very recent meta, I don't think that this deck is like, I don't think it's it. I'm not surprised to see it kind of in that same class as Christia Sworn in the terms of like decks that are good. Like both Christia Sworn and Zombies are good decks, but they are kind of difficult to play correctly. Like he said, the lines for Zombies are not that easy to see. Some people will like blow their load at the wrong time, not properly see like game and stuff like that, which is all like human error stuff that it shouldn't matter that much, but it does. Like the easiness of a deck, you'll see what is at the top, and it makes sense when you see like the deck that is actually with a higher than 55% win rate is going to make total sense, right? So Zombies being a hard deck to play, on top of it being like kind of weak against some of the top decks, in my opinion, is it just makes sense that it would lose like 47-48% of its games in this tier list.
Okay, going forward, we have this Shining Angel, which represents like pure fairies, so like a Dimensional Alchemist and like, I don't know, these like floaters and such. This deck seems to not be performing very well, and it's probably because it's very complex. I'm not really sure. I know it's a strong deck, but it's one of the very skill-intensive decks in Edison. And yeah, so it's actually here between 50 and 51% win rate.
So I actually disagree that this deck is any more difficult than like really any other deck in the format. Fairies actually just isn't as good as it was made out to be, and that's just the facts are the facts. It has a really, really bad time with Hamster. I also think that Ryko is really good against it too. Ryko makes things like the Alchemist timing. Ryko is pretty much the most common plate monster in the format with Caius. Both of those actually fuck over this deck. So you have a format where Ryko and Caius are the 2 most played monsters. Both of them are extremely good against Fairies. And then you also have a format where Deck Devi is in the top and most represented decks in the format, which this deck cannot handle a deck devastation virus. So there's like multiple things wrong with the deck that make it not that good. What it does have going for it is obviously Archlord Christie is one of the best boss monsters in the format, arguably the best boss monster in the format, but I think that because of the deck that she's in, that makes it like not as good. Like Dark Arm, in my opinion, is the absolute best boss monster because Dark Arm happens to be in the decks that are actually better. So I think that raises Dark Arm's stock in terms of like how powerful it is compared to Christia, where Christia is in a deck full of cards that are not exactly as good. The deck suffers from having too many normal summons. You can only do 1 normal summon per turn. So if you draw a hand, and these are very common hands too, if you draw a hand like Shining Angel, D-Alk, Free the Brave Wanderer if you play that, or like Nova Summoner, which they all, they play that as well. If you draw a hand of like 4 of these normal summon monsters, DD Warrior Lady, stuff like that, that's another one. When you draw those hands with 4 normal summons, that's essentially like starting out the game with less cards than your opponent because you can only use 1 of them per turn. If you ever fall behind in tempo, if you ever get behind, it is really, really fucking bad that you have to just keep on putting one monster on the field per turn and hope to God that they don't resolve a continuous string of like Kaisis and stuff.
Yeah, it's also like you're just feeding into like Shura and stuff. Like this was one of the very first decks I tried to play when I first started the format, and because you kind of are like in the beginning, I think people thought this deck was really strong, and you kind of put me onto it, and I was like, oh, it seems cool. Like I like playing like grindy type decks and stuff like that, but it's just a weird deck. Like I think it just has too many normal summons, and like your boss monster, while powerful, you don't really have a great way to like turbo it out other than like crashing a recruiter, which like is not really always a viable play in Edison these days. So it's just
you know what the truth is too. Deep Prison is the most played card in all of Edison. Like actually, Deep Prison is in any tournament. There are more Deep Prisons in the entire tournament than there are any other card in the entire tournament. Deep Prison, and that fucking card, because it's so popular, and then you're playing a deck that has recruiters that technically do want, like you said, they want to crash into a monster. Deep Prison ruins that. Like that whole concept of I just want to crash, get Christia. In a perfect world, that might work. But over the course of several rounds and several Deep Prison decks, it's just really hard to resolve that scenario.
Right. And you know, as you talked about with all the normal summons, like, you know, if you have 3 or 4 normal summons in your hand and something happens to one of them, like part of the appeal of the deck is your monsters are like very sticky, or like they trade 1 for 1 like Warrior Lady and stuff. But you know, if your recruiter gets deprisoned, or you know, any like you get Caius or anything like that, then all of a sudden you don't have board presence, and now you're, you know, down a lot of life, down board presence, and your best play next turn is to set another monster or summon another monster and hope nothing happens to it. Like you just don't have like power plays, so like you often just die with cards in hand, which, as you said, like essentially means you didn't have those cards just like at the start of the game. Like they just didn't exist because you never got to use them.
The other thing I can't get through the hamster problem, man. Like the hamster is a very, just like Raikou, because Raikou is so popular, Raikou being the most popular monster in the format, Raikou and Caius. Because Raikou is so popular, hamster is popular as well, and this deck really gets walled off by that 1800 defense. Like that is actually a huge problem. D-Alk doesn't get through it. DD Warrior Lady is a meme because, okay, sure, DD Warrior Lady attack hamster, I get Raikou. Are you banishing? Like you probably have to, but that's like that's not very good, but you kind of just have to, or do you just like let that wall you off until they eventually start Caiusing you and doing whatever their deck is supposed to do?
Yeah, I think the only thing you really have that can get over is like Soul of Purity and Light, which you are not summoning unless something has already died. So
yes, and a lot of the fairy decks don't even play that card. So it's actually, hamster is a really big problem to me. Thank God that Spy isn't more popular in the format. But because if it was, it would be even worse. Like this deck has a hard time with just if a Spy resolves, good fucking luck Fairies getting through that.
Which yeah, I mean it's better than random, but I do not really think it's the best, and it's actually scores lower than X Sabers, because I just think it's too fair, and I think you need a lot of knowledge to play this deck, and maybe this deck does not really perform that well if you take an average across the whole meta, let's say. Now, the first deck in the category of 54 to 53% is Hero Frog. This deck is very strong. You can duplo Q. It plays better than most of the other frog variants because of the resilience to DDV with the heroes and such. I mean, I do not really know much about this deck. I tried to pick it up lately, but I'm not really sure. But I know it's a very strong contender. People usually put it in the top S tier, but I mean, based on this calculation, it's not really S tier. However, still, it's a very, very strong deck, 54 to 53%. So, I mean, in theory, if you play X number of games, a portion of those would be free, right? Because you have this kind of positive win rate that if you play averagely, you will still win more than you lose. Which holds for most of these decks, right? Except the bottom category. Now, another deck that's been gaining...
All right, so Hero Frogs, in terms of where it's ranked, I think that this is actually a good spot for it based on results, right? Because this is definitely one of the decks that really is harder to play in general. Like when I watch replays of Hero Frog people, a lot of people are kind of new to the deck when they are playing it. People don't really like frogs in Edison format is a big part of it. Like they pick it up, they try to play the deck, and they either play it because like, oh, it's the flavor of the week, or because they just want to try it. And I think that this is not a deck that is easy to pick and play. Like let's say Blackwings. Blackwings is the easiest deck for you to just pick up and just start winning. You can just beat anybody with Blackwings. I don't care how good they are. Blackwings can just give you free wins. I don't think Hero Frogs are going to give you free wins the same way if you don't play it really well. There are a lot of misplays to be had in this deck. There's a lot of like knowing when to go for certain things. in this deck, and it really impacts how the game is going to go. If you know when you're supposed to go for substitute, when you're supposed to do a monarch here, when you need to use your econ or your soul exchange or whatever. So this deck, I think that on top of it being relatively actually difficult, unlike Fairies, I think that not only is it a little bit difficult, but there are only a few players who've ever even done well with Hero Frogs in like the entirety of Edison format so far. It's not hugely represented, but then the people who do well with it is just like a small group of people. And I think that if you're looking at Dueling Book Ladder, where there's like a lot of random people just playing the deck just to try it out or whatever, you're going to end up with like, I'm not surprised with these results, basically. Like, I'm not surprised that it's not absolutely top of S tier. Also, I don't think that it is at the top of S tier anyway. Like, if I do a tier list right now, I would not have Hero Frogs at like in the same category as, let's say, Value Turbo, right? Like, I just don't think those decks are equal. I do think that Value Turbo doesn't necessarily want to play against Hero Frogs, but I don't think that it's like an abysmal matchup. I think that the matchup spread for Hero Frogs is worse than the matchup spread that Value Turbo has, where like there's really nothing to side deck against Value Turbo, whereas Hero Frogs has like so many cards you can side deck against it.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. That's my big thing. Like, is that like the cards like Fossilina and stuff like that can like totally shut you out of games, and that like, you know, that's hard to deal with compared to Value.
Yeah.
But so I agree with like your analysis and ranking there. I think also with what you said with the difficulty of the deck, I mean, I think this deck is definitely a lot harder to play than say like Fairies or, you know, most other decks on this list, really, just because there are so many lines every given turn. Like, you can like thin your deck so much, but maybe you don't always want to do that, you know. Like, you can go for like dupe blocks, maybe you want to like sub block sometimes. There's a lot of like decision points every single game, and it's really hard to play. And I mean, it's a deck that like I've played a decent bit playing against Cairo to help him test like in random night games, and I always notice like after we play that like I've misplayed at least once in the match, and like, you know, I don't usually feel like that with most decks, but yeah, that deck's pretty hard.
A big part of it is like knowing when to set traps. I see people lock their Treeborn Frog all the time. Like, people will just make the mistake of setting a trap when they really don't need to set the trap, and then your Treeborn Frog can't come back. So then you start playing this game where Treeborn Frog is a +1 every turn, right? You're supposed to get this +1 pretty much every single turn that it is in the grave. But when you have a trap set and you can't get the trap off the field because your opponent isn't doing anything, you give them turns to recover, and you're not really pressing on them at all. And so it's just like this weird part of the game that happens where your opponent builds up card advantage that they normally would just be like down bad while you're doing stuff. But setting like a D prison when you really don't need to set a D prison or whatever can really throw this deck's tempo off. It's a very hard deck to navigate correctly, and I'm not even saying that I play it perfectly either. It is very difficult. I always learn stuff after watching like replays or like playing it myself. It's definitely one of the actual harder decks, like genuinely very difficult. It's the reason why basically in Edison format, Ronak is like the one person who tops a lot with frogs, and he only plays frogs, but his rate of topping is so high. There's no one else on his level when it comes to topping with frogs, right? Like, there's no one who tops as much, and that's a testament to like, well, clearly the deck is good enough to do so consistently, but why is it really just one person doing it? Well, it's probably because the deck is actually harder than a lot of people realize. So there's that. Like, I think that the deck is usually better than most of the players who pick it up, is the reality of it. But yeah, games 2 and 3, like you said earlier about other decks like Nerlaris, you're supposed to kind of like win game 1 with Hero Frogs, and then games 2 and 3 is like, can I get there, because the side deck cards are really, really, really good against Hero Frogs and like frog decks in general.
Popularity, which is this kind of Gaia Earth Bark Calling package with like millers. It also plays like Grand Mole and such. This deck, although it topped, I think, recently, I'm not so sure, but this deck does not seem to be doing very well. Based on the statistics, it's here, because I feel like personally, and this is my personal opinion, it's that this deck does not really do much other than set up for its big plays. It's a relatively strong deck when you get it going, but sometimes I feel like the hand with this deck can be just mediocre and outclassed. So I think that's why it falls within this category, but of course I'm open to anyone giving an alternate interpretation. Now the next...
So this is the Rock Stun deck. It's a Hamster Record Kaya's deck that plays like Quackimero Guardian, which is just Doom Caliber Knight, but better, because you can choose if you want to use it or not. It plays Dark Calling to summon a really big guy and all that stuff, and it plays like triple Fossil in the main deck, and it plays that Return from Stone card that summons a banished rock monster. So it can summon Fossil in the middle of a chain. So if your opponent goes summon Diva, you can go activate the trap card that's like a Call on a Hornet for the banish pile and summon False Dyna and negate it. It is actually, in my opinion, a pretty strong deck. I don't think it's well represented at all. Like, most people just don't play it, even though it has had like some success in Edison format, but it's very underplayed. In terms of it being under 50% win rate, I really don't know what to say about that because I don't have a strong opinion on it because I don't get to see it that often to critique it. Like, it's one of those decks that in theory, when I have seen it played, I'm impressed by what I've seen it do. Like, I've seen it played in some of my tournaments, the IMNerdpodcast locals and stuff like that, and it seems to perform well. Like, I've seen it beat Blackwings multiple times. I've seen it beat Value. I've seen it beat Frogs. I've seen it do a lot, but I also see the other side of it where it sometimes draws bricky because it is playing like Dark Calling and this guy right here, this 2800 rock monster that you have to banish 2 rocks to summon. That card's a brick a lot of the times. You know, it's either the reason why you won the game or it's the reason why you absolutely lost the game. It's very polarizing in that way. So
yeah, opening that card is tough.
It is. Yeah, and I think it plays like a full playset. So it definitely has issues. At the end of the day, Value Turbo is the most ridiculous Hamster Echo Caius deck. It's the most consistent one because all of its cards work kind of independently of the other cards, which makes it very strong in the opening hands. Like, Value typically draws consistent hands, and I think a deck like this that's also a Hamster Echo Caius deck, the hands can be very swingy, where sure, you can draw like your Raikos and Hamsters and Caiuses and do well, but the games where you don't, and you just see like Fossil Dyna and traps, they're probably not going to go your way, where your opponent's just like, okay, well, you have a Fossil Dyna for some reason game 1. I'm going to set a Raiko or a Hamster here and just like wall you out. And if you attack with the Dyna, I'm going to deprison it and then, you know, flip Hamster, get my guy and do stuff. It can be really, I can see that being like really, really bad for the deck. Just the 2800 brick guy, the Dark Callings, when it's kind of awkward to have them when you don't have the setup, which always, that happens a lot. Like, you just draw the hands that have Dark Calling, but you don't have the Fiend and the Rock to use it with. So you're like trying to get to that the whole time, but your opponent's also just playing the game. Yeah, just consistency issues I think is probably what holds this deck back, and I don't think a lot of good players actually take this seriously, so they don't play it.
I think your point about the Hamster Echo Caius thing is something that people get trapped by a lot, where it's like, you know, you can win games with like various decks, but maybe you're just winning because you drew like the good part of your deck. Like in Tengu format, like maybe you have a bad deck, but you just drew like Thunder King Tour Guide and you beat your opponent with that, right?
Yeah.
So like those cards can be good, but that doesn't make your deck good. Like, you kind of have to distinguish those things, and like I don't know. I think people are sometimes bad at doing that. That's all.
Yeah.
Deck is actually Gladiator Beast, and they
this is crazy.
Between 53 and 53%.
I'm actually not surprised.
This deck is very strong. Actually, I've done some other analysis that I'm not showing here, but it has a very few strong individual cards in there. And I think once you get it going, once they start punching over your monsters, it's really, really difficult to slow them down because they start popping your back row and such. And this guy, this fusion guy, the boss monster, is I believe one of the strongest like cards in Edison. It's just a flat out negate, and it's extremely strong. So yeah, that's why this deck falls in here. But also maybe it's because it's easier to play and zombies are more difficult to play. So maybe this is the reason, right? None of this is included in this analysis, and I think you have to take this analysis with a grain of salt. Now we have after that
So GBs. I wish that included in his data, or maybe taken out of his data, and there's no way for him to really know this, I think, but how many people just immediately click admit defeat or like quit as soon as they see a GB get summoned or whatever on ladder? Because this is another one of those decks that's like Chainburn. The second you go summon Laquarius at 5, a lot of people are leaving that duel. I don't know if that's enough to say that like in 100k matches, whatever the distribution is that GBs are played in them, in 100k matches, I don't know if those games are just be considered outliers and most people actually do play it out because they care about their ranking and they genuinely like, I want to learn how to beat the GB deck, or they just rage quit. But I know even when I watch content creators on YouTube, when they play against GBs, a lot of times they're like, oh fuck this, and they just click quit and they go to another game. They're just like, I just don't want, they immediately say things like cancer and leave. Like they'll just leave. So there's that, and I think I think GBs brings that out of people a lot. Like I think a lot of people just don't want to play this deck. They don't want to play against it, I mean. But let's just ignore that, right? And say, okay, for the people who do sit down and actually play against it, this deck is winning 52 to 53% of its games, which is like it's winning more than half of its games. Is that, like you said, you think that makes sense? And I know that you actually like GBs, right? Like that's one of the decks that you prefer.
I definitely like when it's like playable. I I've kind of steered away from it over time because I feel like there are certain matchups that are really, really hard for GBs, but I also think there's certain matchups that are really good.
Yes.
So like you can kind of just high roll your bracket and like maybe top a tournament. Like it just depends, I think. But yeah, I mean, your point about the people quitting, I didn't really think of GBs like that, but I guess I'm not as in tune with the scene as you. So like, if that is true, then that can definitely skew the data, and maybe that's part of why it's up here. Because like, I don't think it's like a super good deck. Like if you told me GBs was as good as Christius Warren, I would tell you you're crazy. So,
right.
I'm not. But I mean, the data is, it's there. So
yeah, and GBs is a deck that has some, like you said, matchups, bracket luck. So GBs has some really good matchups. Frogs is a good matchup for GBs typically. Although I think Hero Frogs does better than like most regular Frog decks because Hero Frogs plays natural like 1900 monsters and stuff like that. But even still, GBs want to play against Frogs. GBs also love to play against things like Dragon Turbo because if they establish Heraclinos at any point, it's probably game.
Yeah, that's one thing I was gonna say. I noticed that matchup's actually not too bad because like they oftentimes just like pass as well. Like they need like a turn to set Reckless and stuff and like get going. And you can, anytime you pass against GBs with an open board, that's really, you're asking for some trouble there.
Yep. So it has some good matchups in the format. And I think that is one of the things that can actually go its way. You can definitely top a tournament if your bracket is nice to you. But if you end up playing against like a lot of Hero Beat, a lot of Blackwings, probably, I don't imagine you're doing well that tournament because those decks just have big monsters, really good trap cards like Icarus Attack when you end phase. Like if Blackwings, if they go winning the die roll also with GBs is important. Like if you lose the die roll and your opponent goes Whirlwind and anything, or not even Whirlwind, if they just go like Summon Shore, set 2 back row, pass, you're in a bad spot if that back row is Icarus Attack because you can't beat the Shora, right? Like there's nothing you can summon that can attack over the Shora. So the Shora is staying. And then you have to set traps for your deck to function. So then like if Icarus Attack is involved at all, very normal thing, most decks play 3. You're probably just getting blown out when they go pop you 2 back rows, draw for turn, summon Blizzard, bring back Shora. Like the game's probably just falling apart immediately right there. But yeah, bracket luck is a thing. I talk about this in a video. You definitely need it to do well in general. Like if you play against a deck that your deck is kind of catered to beating, then yeah, you probably do top. So
yeah,
we have Lightsworn. Now Lightsworn falls in here, so it's slightly weaker than Christius Warren. It's stronger than Gladiator Beasts, but this is like a pure Lightsworn with the glorious illusions and such.
Wolf.
And yeah, this deck is rather strong. It's 53 to 52% win rate, but it's nothing major, and I think it gets. Like Christius Warren is better, and I think that's what most people play. Now you'd be surprised, to my surprise as well, gadgets actually are here, which is very surprising because you wouldn't think. But I think by doing this analysis over the whole of basically last 2 months, something that I've come to realize is that free +1s actually push these decks a lot higher in terms of win rate. Because let's say you play like a deck such as Zombies or Lightsworn, you trade your cards 1 for 1, and you gain advantage by outplaying your opponent. But with the decks such as Gadgets, like you are always having a +1 every turn, and I think in the long run, like you can get your opponent to start top decking while you have 3 or 4 cards in hand. You trade 1 for 1 with Smashing Ground and such, so I think that's rather strong, and I think it's underestimated. And I also think Red Gadget is pretty cool as a card, so yeah.
So, interestingly enough, right now, the 2 highest rated decks are Hero Frogs and Gadgets, and he was saying that I think that +1s play a part in that. And I already said how Treeborn Frog, every single turn you bring it back is a +1, right? It's like draw for turn, then bring back Treeborn. You literally go +1 by just drawing for turn. It kind of reminds me of a Spellbook Tower, right? You draw, and then you draw again. So Treeborn Frog is very similar to that, where you draw, and then you bring back this card that it's a real card when it comes back, especially if there's a Monarch involved, or if there's a Substitute involved. Substitute turns it into a Unifrog, or turns it into a Dupe Frog, or turns it into a Swap Frog.
Or enemy controller. Like, there's so many ways to take advantage of it. Like, on its own, it's not a threatening card, but in the context of your deck, with how it's set up, like it does do a lot of things. I think that's the difference, though, between Treeborn Frog and Gadgets, is that, like, like a Gadget is not really threatening.
Right.
Much. Like, usually, there's no rank 4 Xyz, like, you can't, like, it's just, like, you can discard it to Fortress or something, sure, but I don't think it's nearly as powerful as what Treeborn does for the Frog deck, so I'm actually surprised to see Gadgets up here. Like I said, I wasn't surprised to see Gladiator Beast. I am surprised to see Gadgets. I will not cap about that, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a very good deck personally, but I mean, I get what he's saying about the +1s and like you don't have to play that well to have card advantage and stuff. But at the end of the day, like I don't think card advantage necessarily wins matches. So it's
Right.
It's kind of just hard to reconcile this one in my
I've
head.
I've heard that Gadget has a good Via Turbo matchup. That's what I've been hearing from some of the top, like the very top level value players. That Gadgets is weirdly, like most people don't know this because when do you ever see fucking Gadgets, right? But most people don't realize or know that matchup is kind of bad for Value Turbo, which is technically like the best deck in the format results wise in terms of just like what deck has won the most tournaments and probably has the most tops right now. So apparently, I haven't tested this out. I haven't like verified this, but I trust these people who have played with Value most of the format and they just like, oh god, when I see Gadgets, it's actually like not fun. Because think about this, if nothing else, we can agree that Ryko against the Gadget is bad, right? Like that is a bad trade. You summon Gadget, go +1, and then you attack face down into Ryko and they go pop the Gadget. That is a great trade for the Gadget deck every time. And so I can see that being like an issue. But the thing that kind of surprised me a little bit is how fair Gadgets are in terms of like they don't really have broken blowout cards like Dark Arm Dragon, Return from Different Dimension, stuff like that. And most of them don't even play Brain Control, right? Sometimes they don't play Heavy Storm because a lot of these cards don't benefit them. Some of the best cards in the format Gadgets don't really take advantage of, and so it just has this like very low ceiling game plan that can work against players who are not that good. I think that better players do know how to beat a Gadget deck. The strength that the deck has right now though is that no one is playing Cyber Dragon. Cyber Dragon is just not inside decks anymore. And I think that is actually one of the biggest things that make Gadgets more playable than they were, let's say in 2022 and 2023. When I was playing Edison format, everyone had 2 Cyber Dragons in their side deck. Like everyone. That was
yeah. When I first started playing Edison with you guys, like way back then, one of the first RBTs might even be the one you played in Earlier, and I played Gadgets for one of them, and I thought the deck might be kind of solid, but yeah, getting Chimera Tech, all those +1s go right away, and now they have like a 4K guy, and you're just like, well, I can't really beat this, so I don't know.
Yeah, so that is a big deal. And I also don't know, I don't think that Gadgets has the perfect build yet. I think that we need someone who's really good to just play Gadgets for a long time and refine the build the way Ghost Rider refined Dragon Turbo to really like get it to the point where it can start topping events, because Gadgets, you can play them in so many ways. Like I'm interested when he says Gadgets, right? This could be Machina Gadgets, but some of them don't even play any of the Machina cards. Like they don't play any of them. They don't play Gear Frame or Fortress or whatever. They just play straight up Gadgets and a bunch of like Smashing Grounds, Fisher, and stuff like that. Then there's also Solidarity Gadgets, which is another deck, and that deck actually has a good matchup against things like Hero Beat and Blackwings, because all the Gadgets get bigger than all the Blackwings and Hero Beat monsters when Solidarity's on the field. It's actually a really bad matchup for those decks. I've played with Gadgets against those decks and like trivialized them because of Solidarity. And I've been the Blackwing player or the Hero Beat player against Gadgets with Solidarity, and I'm like, holy shit, that card is polarizing. Like it really turns the deck to something completely different than what it is when they're just regular 13, 12, and 1400 monsters. So I don't know if seeing Gadgets by itself, like what is the right build of Gadgets, but the fact that it does have such a good win rate, compared to like a lot of these other decks, it's interesting to say the least. Like maybe more people should start taking it seriously.
Yeah, I mean, I remember there were so many theories on Gadgets over the years. Like I don't feel we play like more than 40 cards because you don't want to like draw a double Gadget or whatever really, but some people would even go down to like 6 Gadgets or whatever at times. I don't know. Like it's definitely an underexplored deck, so maybe we've written it off too soon. Who knows?
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm very happy to see this, but I didn't rig this analysis. It's actually here, and I was surprised to see it there, but I think we just have to roll with it. So yeah, Gadgets all the way. They're pretty cool. And you have Gear Frame +1, you have a Gadget +1. I mean, Fortress is an absolute monster of a card. You have Solidarity to punch over everything. So yeah, extremely strong, and I mean, weaker than Hero Frog, for example, but still, I don't think it should be underestimated. And I think people are siding out a lot of their Cyber Dragons, so this is something to consider and maybe pick up this deck. Now, the following deck is actually Hero Beat. So Hero Beat belongs in front Hero Frog. I'm not sure why. I'm not an expert in any of these decks, but I think maybe it has to do with the complexity of frogs. Maybe it has to do that they brick. Maybe this deck bricks less. I am not sure, but they are kind of on par. So the following deck, which I'm sure people are not.
So I don't really have a strong opinion about this. I think you hit it on the nose. I think that Hero Beat is not a very complex deck. If you just have strong fundamentals, then you can play Hero Beat. You just know how to play the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! You know how to properly go +1 on a Hero Blast and a Gemini Spark, and know when to be aggro, know when to conserve your monsters. They're like, that's it. Like, that's the deck. It doesn't have some crazy complicated plays at all. You're just beating them down, hopefully ending the game quickly. The longer the game goes on, the worse it is for this deck because it doesn't have a good late game. But it, you know, it does a really strong thing in the beginning of the game, and I think that it caters towards players who are more beginner-ish than like veteran, really strong players. In fact, most of the best players in the format typically don't touch this deck, especially in 2024. This deck has fallen off a lot. 2023, this was like the deck. It was the deck that everyone was talking about, but noticeably is never won a tournament. And I was the first person to bring that up to the community. Like, this deck has been played for 365 days. It has a ton of tops. It has never won an event. And I think that says a lot. Yeah.
And in one of your videos, you brought up how like they always make top 8, but they alys fall short, and you were trying to figure out like why that was.
Yeah. Because at some point you have to stop saying like, oh, it got unlucky. Like, if it for a year straight, if this deck never ever wins a tournament, no matter who's playing it, there's something else happening there than just like, oh, it got unlucky. That's such a lazy excuse for why it's never won a tournament. There's clearly something else. Yeah, I think Hero Beat is a decent deck. It was better when there were a lot of Blackwings, because supposedly it beats pure Blackwings. So
yeah,
it definitely,
I don't know how it goes against Vayu as well as pure Blackwing. I'm not sure.
Yeah, Vayu is probably an even matchup because hamsters and Raikos. Actually, it's probably just Vayu favored by a little bit. I think that the games are decided by how many Raikos and hamsters are drawn, you know, and how many broken cards the Vayu deck draws. So if the Vayu deck if it sees as Dark Arm Dragon, its Return for Different Dimension, I think that the deck with the lower ceiling is going to lose, which is Hero Beat. Because like those swingy cards like Burial and stuff like that, like, you know, there's so many one-ofs in Vayu that are blowouts. And when it draws those cards, I think Hero Beat with its low ceiling just falls behind really quick. But like, if they just get out tempo, right? You start off with, let's say, Armageddonite, and Hero Beat is just like Stratos, you know, and then you don't see any Raikos or hamsters, which is actually a common thing. Like, I've played a lot with Vayu too, and with the games where you just don't see your fucking set monsters, you can get run over so quick. Like, you summon Sirocco, they're like boundless. You like summon Armageddonite, they just attack over it. And now you have a hard time getting your Caius out now. Caius is also pretty bad against this deck. And yeah, that it's just one of those matchups that's like kind of difficult, but Hero Beat is strong fundamentally if you're just good at Yu-Gi-Oh! But you have to accept the fact that you're going to get blown out by the decks with a higher ceiling. Like, a good Hero Frog player is just going to beat you basically every time. They're just gonna dismantle you. It's not just because that matchup is bad. It's just a bad. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and if you go second against decks with like, you know, that can pop off turn 1 like Dragon Turbo or something, like, you don't really have great ways to like break boards really.
Right.
It can suffer from like the going second like stun deck kind of problem that. I mean, a lot of decks have that problem in this format, and I mean, in most formats really. Like, any deck that isn't, you know, super high ceiling or powerful, like, oftentimes can struggle going second because they can't break the boards. Like, you know, like GPs or whatever. Like, they don't have the best plays to break boards either. Same with gadgets. It's kind of just one of those things.
Yep, very very true.
Priced off is Vayu Turbo, and it falls here. So it's not the best deck in terms of these statistics, as everyone's saying it is, but it's nonetheless a very strong deck. It can. It has some power cards. It can really overwhelm the opponent in a few turns if you mill correctly. But everything that it does is rather fair, and yeah, it's a very strong deck. It deserves to be where it is. It topped a lot. And yeah, I have nothing else to really add here except that I know that very good players are playing it. So I would maybe make a judgment call and say that, okay, if the same players were playing some other decks, potentially they would top with that deck and then the meta would shift. But I mean, yeah, this deck is very strong and I have nothing more to add here. The next deck is, of course, Blackwing, which is better than Vayu Turbo. And in fact, it's the only deck that so far is in this category of.
So, no surprise here in terms of where Blackwings is. Like I said earlier, I kind of alluded to this, but I think that Blackwings is one of the easiest decks in the entire format to play. That's one of the reasons why I think that Blackwings is overall the best deck. And you guys know, if you've been listening to this channel for the last like 2 years now, I often talk about how I think Blackwings is the best deck in Edison format just because of this reason. Like, ease of access makes it actually insane. You can just give this to a newer player and they will just beat people who are way better than them actually not even like a low chance. Like they will just beat them, right? Because if you just look at the cards individually, like Blizzard is so ridiculous. Like Dark Arm is obviously ridiculous. Whirlwind is literally an auto win. In fact, this year in War League for Edison format, there was a point where like games where Blackwing's open Whirlwind, they were winning 100% of the time, and then it dropped to like 90 something. But that's ridiculous. Like that's fucking ridiculous. Like to have a card that says, and War League is like a lot of the better players too. So for you to be like, oh, if Whirlwind is opened in this deck, the deck just wins that game, is pretty dumb. That's pretty insane. That's kind of my point, is that this deck just has some incredible auto wins that are really not based on your skill as a player. They're just based on like this is just more powerful than anything else that's happening in the format or in this game. Now it does have a shitty matchup against Value Turbo a lot of the time, because Value Turbo is taking the best parts of Blackwings like Sirocco and just using it against the Blackwing deck, and then also Hamster's extremely good against Blackwings. Like it's actually so goddamn good against that deck. So when you think about, oh, I can summon Sirocco and pump against your guys, and then I also set Hamster to wall off your Shura, who normally wants to like eat my monsters, what are you eating against Value Turbo? Like there's nothing to attack over besides Armageddonite, and oftentimes they send Necroguard into the grave where they just have a Deep Prison or Bottomless. So Shura has a really hard time getting anything against Value Turbo. And that's just that matchup, right? But Blackwings has a good matchup spread against most of the other decks. Like I think Blackwings does great against Hero Frogs. It obviously does great against Gadgets because they're all lower than Shura, and that's just like where you want to be. I think that Blackwings definitely beats Zombies because of the reasons I mentioned earlier. Same thing, Shura food, like all their monsters are just, all the Recruiters, Pyramid Turtle, Tomato, Goblin Zombie, they're all Shura food, and then it also plays into like you need 2 cards on the field to do zombie things, and then Blackwings are like, perfect, I'll oppression that, or perfect, I'll Icarus attack that. So there's a lot of reasons why Blackwings is outrageously strong in the format. Deck Devastation Virus, one of the best side deck cards, one of the best cards in the format. It plays that. Allure Darkness. It gets access to like so many things, and it's so good at winning the game early without your opponent getting to really set up. Like I think if the other decks get a chance to really set up, they can be more powerful than Blackwing's ceiling per se. But it's a damage deck, and it's so good at doing a lot of damage fast. Like it's so good at it. So
yeah, it's kind of ignorant when you just die from like 6,000 against Blackwing.
Yes.
They have a bunch of Kalutes or whatever, and you're like, well, and they can even kill you through monsters too because of Bora. It's actually like crazy. They can pump their Bora with their guy, and then you're like kind of mad.
Yeah, it's a deck that kind of doesn't play by the rules of the format where you're supposed to get like several turns. Like sometimes Blackwings just takes you out of it. You get dropped so low so fast that now every one of their cards can kill you. And that's kind of the situation that happens in most of the games where Blackwings is being played when it does win. Like when it wins, a lot of times because I drop you to like 1,300 or 700 or some weird number. So now any Kalute at any point is game. Any Blizzard at any point is game, right? Like it just becomes, I just need to touch you one time now from this point. Like, oh, if I ever see my brain control, you just lose. And that's actually the real game plan of the deck. It's like a burn deck, right? It's almost like burns. Like I'm just trying to get your life points low enough to where anything kills you. You put a monster in defense, you set a Raiko, summon Bora, attack, 1,600 death.
Above 55% win rate, which is actually a lot if you think about it. 55% win rate, this 5% is actually a few free games over a course of a tournament or a few tournaments. So of course, it's been the best deck of the format for a while. Everyone knows Blackwings are good, but I think the reason why people are not playing them and why it's not topping is maybe because it's rather boring, and I think Value Turbo is much more explosive, much more cool, so the good players gravitate towards this kind of combo-ish style rather than just simple, okay, Whirlwind, sure, okay, let's win for free kind of deal. So yeah, the next deck, again, you'd be surprised, but to me it kind of makes sense, and actually Machina Control falls here. So it's below Blackwing, but it's above Value Turbo, and by a significant amount, by actually like 0.9, I believe, which is a lot of percentage, which is almost like 1%. And yeah, because it has an inherent +1, you have a great starter. In fact, Gear Frame is one of the best starters based on my analysis of like individual cards. And it simply plays all the good cards. Avarice is a +1, Gear Frame is a +1. You have a Hamster Raiko Kaias engine that just generates advantage. And yeah, Fortress, you just lap a Fortress, and it's like a searchable absolute zero, basically. It's very strong, you can kind of wipe a board with it. It's a very difficult to out. I think it's a very strong deck, and I've seen some people top with it recently. It's been more popularized, but Personally, I this makes sense to me, but I think this might be a little bit controversial.
So this is what I really wanted to get to, because I saw this part of the video already. This is Luke's first time seeing this, but I was very surprised to see Machina control this high.
I'm extremely surprised. I was actually gonna, I was actually gonna ask you at some point about Machina control, because like we talked about gadgets and like how they don't always play Machina cards, and I'm like, oh well, you know, I wonder how the Machina cards are actually doing. And yeah, this is not a deck I would have pegged as being this high of win rates.
So here's the thing. If you look at any of my tier lists, like look at any of the last tier lists I've done on my channel, I always talk about Machina control being an extremely good deck. I think that it is very slept on. I say that all the time. In terms of like having it above Vayu and Blackwings, I would definitely say like no. But I think that it's up there because it is the second best Hamster Echo Kaius deck in the format, and I don't think it's close. Like I think if Vayu is the #1 undisputed Hamster Echo Kaius deck in the format, Machina control is right there. But something that people just don't talk about enough, and I've been saying this for a while, I genuinely think that Machina control has a good Vayu turbo matchup, because the boss monster in Vayu is a 2300 vanilla, right? And the boss monster in Machina control is a 2500 guy that naturally beats over. So you already have this pressure of like, if you summon your Armwing and I summon my Machina Fortress, I win. The second thing that happens though is even when the Armwing, the 2300 monster, becomes a 2500 monster with the next value, so it becomes an Armor Master. Okay, now Fortress crashes with the Armor Master, and I pop a card because of Fortress's effect. So I think that is a really like bad interaction point against Vayu. Like Vayu does not like that, where you just beat my monster in battle, and then when I upgrade my monster to an Armor Master, you beat it in battle technically and pop a card. Like you crash with and pop a card, which is just obviously a +1 at that point. So there's like multiple reasons why I think Machina control is a fantastic deck. And then Pot of Avarice, that +1. So you have, like he said, you have the Gear Frame +1. You have Hamster, which is a +1. Raiko in some situations is a +1, but most times it's just a 1-for-1. But then you have the Pot of Avarice. So you have Pot, you know, Gear Frame, Hamster, Raiko, Kaius. There's just a lot of plussing. And then it plays Lila too. And in theory, Lila is a +1 in the turn that she like pops a card and she's still there. Usually she just gets beat over or whatever, but like in that turn that she does that, she has a +1.
Kind of provides you some value too with like filling your graveyard for the pots, like you were saying. So I mean, it's like, you know, even if she gets beat over, right, it's a 1-for-1, but you kind of generated some like invisible advantage by killing some guys.
Yeah. So I am still, like you said, I'm very surprised to see this deck literally being like the second best deck in terms of win rate out of 100,000 matches on Dueling Book. I think that is interesting. I would love to see how many games we're talking about, but but this deck does top. It just topped the last YCS this past weekend in Raleigh. It got top 8 in Raleigh. The guy was 7-1, so one of the best records that you could have. And yeah, I mean, his list is fine. It looks like every other Machina control list for the most part. Like it plays all the same things: the Kaiuses, the Hamsters, the Raikos, the Gear Frames, Fortresses, whatever. Right? It plays all those cards. And then they just choose like a trap lineup, which is also usually pretty standard. But this deck, because it plays Hamster, has a good matchup against Blackwings. It just naturally has that good Blackwing matchup. And then Fortress is good against Kalut, right? Like summon Fortress, attack your Shura. You Kalut that? Okay, well, pop your guy.
Yeah, you get a pop. Yeah, it's not bad. I guess it's technically a net. Yeah, that's, I guess it's like even, right? Because I got a guy back with Shura, but not. I guess they use the Kalut though, so I guess it's you still get a card. I don't know. I have to think about it more.
Yeah, so I think if I'm turn player and I attack over your Fortress, I think that my effect. Well, Fortress is mandatory, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm trying to think how that would work out. Did they get a guy or not? I don't remember. Honestly.
If Fortress is mandatory, then it's Chain Link 1. Because Shura is definitely optional. Like Shura does not activate every single time you beat a monster in battle. I'm pretty sure Shura is optional. I think Fortress is mandatory when it dies. I think that it has to pop something, in which case it will be Chain Link 1 if Shura beats over it. And I'm turn player, I attack over your, like I attack, I use Kalut, I beat over, then your guy is going to be Chain Link 1 mandatory, and my Shura will be Chain Link 2. So you do get a guy, and then it would just like pop. So then I lost my Fortress, which Fortress is not really a 1-card investment. It usually takes 2 cards unless you use Machina Force. So it's definitely like a complicated situation in determining like who goes plus there or if it's just even. What it is not though is it's not negative. Like it's not a negative interaction.
Yeah, it's never bad. So, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean I guess that kind of makes sense if the meta is really converging on like, you know, top performing decks, which is Vayu and Blackwing, to like have a deck that's good against it be highly rated, or like,
right,
have a good win rate. But because like I don't know how good Machina Control is against like random decks. Like when I tested it a little bit, like when I play against like Dragon Turbo or like Frogs or something, like I would get in some really awkward game states and I wouldn't feel like that advantage. But
Yeah.
I feel like in the matchups against, you know, specifically Valiant Blackwings, that does make sense why it would do well. And you know, sometimes, like I said, you know, you can just have good matchups and you'll do well that day. So
yeah, if your matchups are nice, if you play against the matchups you're supposed to play, because this deck does not do that well against Frogs. It is naturally a deck that Frogs likes to play against. It sets monsters, and its pluses are cool, but they're nowhere near the level of pluses that Frogs gets. Unifrog rips this deck apart. You know, it typically doesn't even play Deep Prison. A lot of lists that I see don't play that card, so Unifrog just goes in. Yeah, so it, you know, it's one of those decks that it makes sense to be high if Blackwings and Vayu are so high, and it has a theoretically a good matchup against those two, or at least even if you don't agree that it's a good matchup against those two, then it's at least even. I don't think that it loses to those decks.
Yeah, it's definitely not losing. Yeah.
Is that 100%?
Like,
it's not losing. Yeah.
I will say like it's okay to have like bad matchups. Like every deck is going to have some bad matchups,
Correct.
and like you said, like Frogs is not a super like popular deck.
Exactly.
It's really hard to play. So like if my bad matchup is like pretty lowly represented and my good matchups are very highly represented, like that naturally is going to be good for me, and I'm, you know, maybe I'm just willing to accept that.
Yeah,
like that's, you know, yeah.
Again, another great deck is Amaryllis Burn, and this deck falls within this category, so 53 to 52 win rate, and in fact it's at the beginning of this category here. And this deck is very strong. It has a lot of power plays. It can burn your opponent. It can float all of these plants. You have a Titanial, you can steal monsters. It's a very strong deck. I think the only problem with it is that the cards are expensive, but I think it should see more play definitely. And other than that, yeah, Amaryllis Burn, it has topped recently. Yeah, it's a strong deck.
So this deck is basically just like the very middle, right? Like it's dead in the middle technically because it's at the top of the mid tier. I think that it's just underrepresented, like he said, because people don't really have the cards in real life. So that's one thing. But we're talking about Dueling Book where everyone has everything. Again, I'm going to say it. I just have to say it again, but I don't think many people are playing this deck, even on DB ladder or whatever. So I bet the sample size for this particular deck is low. I don't know how many people know how to play this deck correctly because I don't think it's that easy. Like I really don't. I'm not 100% sure. When I've played it, I always feel like I'm not doing it 100% right, but I also don't know if it's one of those decks that even does like some amount of crazy technical plays. Like it just feels, the list that I've played are prior to the newer Miracle Fertilizer builds. I'm talking about like the old Carpath build that kind of started Amaryllis Burn, that play like Volcanic Counter and stuff like that. Obviously that deck bricked a lot more than I guess the newer ones probably don't brick as much because they don't open up like fucking counter and a bunch of like trade-ins and stuff without monsters to discard for it or whatever. But in terms of Amaryllis, I know it has a good Frog matchup because Titanial is annoying as hell, and Frogs don't play Dark Dust Spirit anymore, and people main deck Legacy Yatagarasu, so it's even more awkward. But Dark Dust Spirit doesn't really play, which is one of the best cards against Amaryllis, and Titanial's annoying, and all the stealing is annoying, like taking your Caius and then summoning Lone Fire Blossom and attacking for 28 and 24 could just be game, right? Like that's 5,200 damage out of nowhere. They play 3 Market Rose, or not 3, they play 1 Market Rose and like 3 copies of Hidden Armory a lot of the time. So they play technically, you know, 4 Brain Controls that are searchable. So it definitely does good things against one of the best decks. And then I also heard, and I don't know if this is true, that it has a good matchup against Vayu. It kind of makes sense that Titania will be good against a deck that plays Raikou and Deep Prison at max. Like Raikou, Deep Prison, and Caius are pretty much maxed out in Vayu Turbo decks. And Titanial deals with all of those, and especially if Titanial gets tokens. God forbid if there's a Dandelion at any point.
Yeah, I was gonna say if they get tokens, this is super. Those cards are never doing anything. Like,
yeah, it's cooked, right? So that's what I'll say about that. I like Amaryllis as a deck. I go back to it every once in a while just to play it because it's fun. But in terms of like, do I think it's, you know, one of the best decks in the format? Not really. But I think it's a solid like A tier deck. Like I think it's a solid A tier deck, and obviously every deck can just top or get pretty far. But I don't think it sits at the same table with like the decks that are above it on this list. Maybe Hero Beat, because Hero Beat just cannot for the life of it win a tournament. But you know. And there's only 1 deck left.
So let's proceed with the last deck, which is Dragon Turbo. So this deck, I was surprised to see it, but it's not in this category as many people put it. In fact, it's not even in this category. It's actually all the way down here, and it's the worst deck out of all. This might come as a surprise to many, because if once you get OTK'd by this deck, it feels unfair. But over the course of all the games I've analyzed, and probably over the course of a big tournament, you just have so much variance in this deck, so much difficulty to get your plays going, you can break so hard. And I think the win rate of this deck, if I recall correctly the numbers from my head, is actually like 47%. So like these ones are like 49, barely going into 50. This is actually just, on average, you will lose more games than you win. Now, the reason why this deck is topping is, again, my belief is that the people are playing this deck because they're good players and they like the combo style, so they can push these numbers up from like 47. Your win rate might be 60% and you will still top a tournament because you're a good player. But overall, I think the image of the meta, when considering that, I think this deck should stay here. Now,
so Dragon Turbo being the absolute worst performing deck in terms of win rate on this tier list, what do I think about that? Because this is interesting. I think that Dragon Turbo, I've been playing it for a little while now, and here's what I'll say. It still is definitely a casino deck, right? Like that part of it. There are games where a good player can play this deck and they will lose to someone who isn't on their skill level because of just getting rushed down or bricking or whatever. That is just what this deck, you don't get that many turns because it doesn't play that much defense. Whereas if I brick with like frogs, or if I brick with Value Turbo, whatever a brick means in those decks, I'm definitely getting a lot more turns than I get again when I'm playing when I'm playing Dragon Turbo. And when I play Dragon Turbo, if you look at the last video that we posted, I just posted a video called Turbo, like it says Turbo Time and playing against Dragon Turbo, something along those lines. But basically the picture, the thumbnail for it is just a bunch of super rejuvenations. And in that video, I'm playing against one of my Patreon friends, and he is playing Blackwings, and he literally goes summon Bora, and then the next turn he summons Blizzard and starts attacking me for 3,000. Now he uses Blizzard, he doesn't even get Blizzard's effect, he's just summoning it for damage. And I'm losing that game because he gets 2 battle phases to do 3,000. On the third turn where I'm like trying to survive, I have to go instant fusion to clear his field, so I'm at 1,000, and then I end up drawing most of my deck, so I do the Dragon Turbo thing eventually. But by the time I do it, I'm at 1,000 life points, and just like I said with Blackwings, I am so easy to kill with a Blackwing deck once I'm at 1,000 life points, and he just like summons Sirocco, summon Gale, half your Brionic, pump attack or whatever, and I just die. My point is that there were 2 battle phases where I literally got attacked for 3,000 by a normal monster and a normal monster. Like
there's like nothing you could really do about it. Like your deck just doesn't have like in between plays. Like if you brick in like Blackwings, right, you can like set a random guy and set an Icarus attack, and like maybe that's not good, right? But like it can at least buy you some time to like draw out of the situation, you know. Whereas like Dragon Turbo, you brick, you're just like a lot of times you're like passing and just hoping they like respect Trag or some shit and don't, you know, like don't like ape up on you, and if they ape up, you're probably just like dead. So
yeah, so he
like when I play against Dragon Turbo, like if I know it's Dragon Turbo, like I do not care. Yes, if you pass, you're dead. Like I'm attacking.
I'm aping out, and you can't be like, oh, I'm afraid to try, because you're going to lose the game anyway. If you respect the fake defense of the deck, you're going to lose. So the deck loses to people who are aware that they just need to be aggro against it and will just go all out and attack you as hard as they can, regardless of the one Trag that's in the deck as the only line of defense in game 1 at least. And I also drew triple blue eyes in that game, so that's another thing to take into consideration. Now that was just Dueling Book being Dueling Book. You know, like drawing at 3 of is ridiculous in any deck. I think it's 0.2%. Like actually, like the math is actually 0.2% to draw a 3 of in your opening hand. I drew all 3 blue eyes in my opening hand. But that's, you know, Dragon Turbo just has hands that are not very playable more often than other decks, and because it doesn't play defense, whereas other decks play traps at least, it doesn't get many turns to like, correct those hands. You're on a very short clock. So what I will say is that like Infernities and other formats, it is very unforgiving to misplays as well. On top of everything else, right? It is a good deck. I think it's way better than like where it is on this tier list that's based off of Dueling Book rated. But I think that the issue is that if you misplay with this deck, it's like you lose. You basically, like Infernities, if you ever played Infernities in your life, if you misplay with Infernities, you're just fucking out of the game. Like you're not coming back. And Dragon Turbo is one of those decks that if you do something wrong, because of how fragile the deck can be, like it's very unforgiving. It's not like Blackwings where you don't have a Blizzard to top deck. when you're in a bad situation, it's like, oh, if I top deck Blizzard, it makes Brionic here, or it makes Goyo Guardian here, and I just instantly get bailed out. You don't have that. You need to play your cards very carefully. You need to push at the right time. You need to conserve at the right time. You also need to just survive. Like sometimes just surviving is a task that this deck can have a really hard time doing. I don't know who is actually playing Dragon Turbo on ladder. It's definitely not Ghost Rider, who's the best Dragon Turbo player or whatever. But I'd argue that there are very, very few people who know how to play Dragon Turbo correctly. And yeah,
I think it's one of those decks too that like you said, it requires some really precise play, and like you need to sort of almost like know the lines or know the play patterns ahead of time. Like it requires some level of familiarity. You have to be like, okay, I know I'm like magical stoning this draw card to draw into like X, Y, and Z to like get me out of this or whatever. Like this is what I need to happen to win this game. And like while you're learning the deck and you're not familiar with those things, like you're just gonna naturally not look for that and not play as well, and you're gonna lose more, right? So like it's just a deck that while you're learning, you're gonna lose a good bit to learn, I think, and like that can obviously impact the results. Because like maybe I'm new to Edison format and I hear Dragon Turbo is the best deck, so like I'm like, all right, let me go play that, and like, you know, and then I just get shit on for a while, and then that makes the deck look worse on these rolls.
Yeah, and that's very real. I think that going on ladder with Dragon Turbo, while it is kind of annoying for people who have to play against that, it is the practice that you need to eventually not get shit on, because this is not a pick up and play deck. It's not. I know people look at it and they think that, oh, you just play draw card, then play Rejuve and you win. But it is definitely more complicated than that, and you will find that out when you try to play it. And there's time to actually duel someone with a pulse. You will find out that it's not as easy as just play draw card, Rejuve for game and win. It doesn't always play out like that. And there are a lot of games where you actually have to duel to win. And again, if you misplay in those situations, you will just lose that game, that match, or whatever. So, but yeah, I think it is way better than where it is on this tier list. But luckily, it's not well represented in the format, thank God. And the deck is often better than most of the people who actually play it. So that's also like a thing, you know, the deck is like, it's hard. It is definitely a harder deck than most people realize. On the outside looking in, you're just like, oh, he just played Future Fusion and he won or whatever. But I promise you there's a lot more decision making that goes into it. The problem is that oftentimes a really good player doesn't get to express their skill as much because they lose the game too fast or they win fast. And it's just kind of like, all right, that didn't, you know, where did you outplay your opponent, right? Like it's probably not happening with Dragon Turbo. But yeah, this is the tier list. So like I said earlier, Diva Hero is not on this, which definitely should be. I'm trying to think off the top of my head if there are any other decks that are missing, but Diva Hero is an actual real deck in Edison format, and it definitely should be on here. I think he said that he just completely missed it in the comment section, and so I don't know where it would be placed. I'm interested though, because I think Diva Hero is actually pretty good, but yeah, other than that, I think that this is a pretty decent idea of where the format is in terms of just like purely results based, not tournament based, but results based on DB ladder. Very interesting to look at. We already know the results of tournaments. It's just Value Turbo wins and then other decks top. That's pretty much how tournaments go. You get a sprinkle of Hero Frogs winning, you get a sprinkle of Blackwings winning, but for the most part, it's just Value Turbo winning, and then, you know, the other decks just top. So, guys, let me know what you think about this tier list. Let me know what you guys think about this tier list in the comment section for sure. Definitely like, comment, subscribe. Also, check out Red Gadget's channel. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. He's planning to do a lot more of these statistical analysis videos in the future, which I will be tuned in. I love this type of shit. I'm a nerd, so this to me is like one of the coolest things. And obviously, there's not a perfect way to look at the format, of course, like we prefaced it by saying that, but it is an interesting way to look at it. And you can listen, I don't know if anyone saw Machina Control being the second best deck, you know, in the format based on this, right? Like I did not see that coming. That if I had to put money on all these decks and what deck do I think is second in the format, it would have been out of Blackwings and Value being interchangeable or something like that. I would have never had Machina Control over, yeah. Yeah,
that was a big surprise. I think, you know, obviously this isn't perfect. No data analysis really ever going to generally be perfect, but it's definitely helpful. And I think, you know, something the community is kind of lacking, like this kind of data-driven approach. So I'm a fan of this as well. I think, you know, at the very least, I think this can maybe breathe some life into some underrepresented decks or like underlooked at decks. Like, you know, maybe you thought, you know, Machina Control was not a great deck, and now you're going to go test it out again or something like that. It gives you a new perspective, right? Or you thought Gadgets was unplayable, and now maybe you're going to try and make a good Gadget build, you know? just
Yeah.
a good way to invigorate the format, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, all right, I think that concludes this one, and yeah, we will catch our next one. Peace.